I've been sitting lately with the Māori word for resilience. And there's a lot of similarities with these Indigenous languages around the world, where when we sit with words, the sounds of words come out of the land. And, we only have 13 letters in our language. And so within a word, we can break it into the different words and sounds that make it up. And it gives us a whole teaching about that thing. Mm-hmm. And so I was sort of sitting with this word lately for resilience, and just trying to remember, what does this really mean? Because I think, like, another example is with veterans who I've worked with for over a decade, and I have been so transformed by them. And resilience gets thrown around for them too, and yet it's not something they need to work at. It's like they've already earned it. They already have it right there. And so I think that this old way of looking at resilience has been a really good reminder for me in this time. And this is different for different iwi or different tribes of Māori in how we sit with words. But, any of these old languages. And so ma, that first stem, is like to be bright. It's like bright and pure. And so that's sort of that, like, part of that. The resilience is that there's a center that never gets taken from us. And there's also, in resilience, sometimes whatever we go through, it actually takes us back to our center as well. And sometimes it's very confronting, and that has its own piece, when we get stripped back. And manawa roa, manawa is, for us, it's the heart, but it's not like the physical heart. It's like the sacred space of the heart. And we have a few. We have one in our gut, we have one in our physical heart, and we have one up in our third eye. And so manawa is this way of being with our sensation and our feelings, and to be able to actually come through those. And it's sort of like the French word for courage, word for courage coming from that French stem of cœur, that, like, courage is really to be in your heart rather than in it. It's not a muscle tool that comes from the external. It's a deep internal giving over, or we kind of fall into that place. And then the wa is time and space, which is also that, like, resilience also transcends time and space, because it's something that's in us that also connects us to so many other times and places and people, that we actually have it in this intergenerational trauma and intergenerational healing. Even our patterns of how we deal with things in the world, we have like non-verbal mannerisms and ways in our bodies that connect to generations above us that we might not even know the full version of, and that even our, like, what's the word, vices, come from a resilient pattern, that, like, even in our hurts, when we follow those threads, and we don't have to go very far, it's like in the body where it'll bring them up, but that is sometimes how we're responding to something. It also connects to resilience of other generations, whether we understand that mentally or not. So that's kind of beautiful to me. And then mana is our, like, power or our authority. And I think that's also really interesting in resilience, that it's like we have to have that power returned to us. And power and authority, they're such as English words, they're so complex,
charged,
aren't they? Yeah. And even with trauma, the word power, it has such a place in trauma. And so does mana, of, like, returning parts of ourselves to ourselves. And then lastly, manawa roa, it's like roa is long or broad or deep. So I just think, wow, for all that to be, of the biggest sense is, and it makes sense. And sitting with, people as we go through these big transformations or these big changes, and that kind of passage stage that we were talking about, like, resilience is truly earned, isn't it? Like it really takes all of us. It doesn't,
Yeah.
it's not like a nice little compartmentalized part of healing. It touches places that we didn't want touched, and when we come out of any kind of trauma, we can't go back to how things were, and that's another big kind of lie or illusion. And actually, it's bringing more pieces together, and so this resilience of being like, yeah, this broad, deep, whole thing that you earn through being with what you have been with. Yeah. Or as you were talking about with helpers and healers, also being with others. You know, being willing to sit in that with others too, and not shut down.
It's beautiful. Well, and you're talking about something that's not outside of yourself. You know, it's almost like the feeling that I was having as you were speaking was like a homecoming, you know, to all the parts. And yeah, I can get what you mean in thinking about resilience as like a, you know, pick yourself up by your bootstraps kind of, get going.
Yes.
Get on with it, right? Is that kind of how they're using it in the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look forward, not back. It's like, oh, you just missed. You know, I think often that happens in healing is that I can't forget or I can't jump forward. And that can create so much shame or so much tension in us when we feel that we're being asked to do that. And we actually feel like we're being left behind, and we are. And like what happened in the trauma or the hurt is we broke away from a part of ourselves. And so it is the bringing those pieces back. And so, yeah, when someone kind of asks us to just look forward, it's like I just feel I feel the holding of my breath.
It's the way in so many cultures around the world, you know, just keep going. And
But I think this is another part of, because you talked about cultural healing, another part of Māori healing, which has been such a gift for me, is watching. So Atirangi Muru and Manu Korewha, two of the tohunga or elders that have really shared this work with me, and they're from North Island. And you know, there'll be times where they'll tell people like, "Come on, get off the table now," or like, there's a time to stop feeling too. And I just think it's interesting because we're talking about this, like, you know, not moving, not jumping ahead and being with, but that there's also this balance. And I think that if you take people out of this world where they need to constantly prove themselves and constantly earn their life, I think this happens immediately, which is what I find a lot in like wilderness work.
Yes.
Land work is like when we're with together and we're more human, and we have both times to feel and we have times to play and we have times to stop thinking, that's actually the balance of the healing. And so there are also times where it's like, you know, we have this release, and there'll be a point where it's like we actually need support to come out of that as well. And I think when we know we have that support to come out of that, you know, that deep cry or that terror or memory, when we know that we have support to come out, then we can actually enter in. And so that's the kind of like container. So I often think about that with like any kind of ceremony or sitting with something, is like having a container of time might be one of the greatest structures that allows us to heal a lot of things across time, because we know there's an entry and an exit, and we can kind of, therefore a lot can happen in the middle.
The cutting through, I'm remembering the meaning of your name and the getting to the essence as well. As you're talking about, okay, time to get off the table now.
There'll be times where, you know, me or someone else is like, no, you know, it's like get her up, carry them outside, put them under the tree.
Wow, with such big healing, that's the fracturing of the stories. You know, we can get in these loops that become over time so comfortable, you know, because they're just familiar. They're really uncomfortable once we get away from them, I think, but they can become so familiar.